Hi everyone, I'm Ian. One of my favorite parts about video games is thinking about all the fun that I've had with games I had years ago. Wind Waker, Pokemon, Spyro, and I always wish I could go back and replay them. But god do they look terrible. Sure, they're ass-old games on obsolete hardware, but going back to them now and seeing how much worse they look compared to games today is half the fun. Companies have noticed this, and their first thought was, how can we profit off of this?
Remakes and re-releases, the quickest and sometimes easiest way to make money off of people's nostalgia. Re-releases aren't something new. Believe it or not, it's something that's been happening since the 90s with games like Castlevania, Centipede, and Command & Conquer. But remakes? Oh, well those are more of a 2010s and on thing. See, with the development of newer and better hardware, companies are either able to upgrade the graphics, put a game on a handheld console, or in the 3DS's case, do both. Now there is a difference between a remake and a re-release. A re-release is just that, a game that was on a platform and was re-released onto another one. Not always a better version, sometimes it's putting the arcade version of Pac-Man onto the Atari 2600. A remake is where a game is rebuilt from the ground up on a newer, better console so it looks and feels better. Sometimes remakes and re-releases are good. Bring a classic game to a new audience who don't want to have to get all the original hardware to be able to play it, but other times, they're just stupid. Take, for example, Space Invaders. Originally released in 1978 on arcade machines, it was re-released on the Atari 2600. This was actually a very good idea as it brought the game to even more people and quadrupled the sales of the Atari 2600. But after this, they just went too far with it, re-releasing it on dedicated handhelds, watches, the NES, phones, and even a calculator. The calculator version of Space Invaders is not really Space Invaders. You have to match up numbers that scroll in from the right. If the numbers reach you on the left, then you lose.
Some games that were re-released really didn't need to be. Sure, if a company does it once and never again, that's fine. But for a company to continuously re-release a game over and over and over, that's a whole different story.
One video game company that loves to profit off of people's nostalgia is Nintendo. Nintendo has re-released and remade Mario so many times I've lost count.
That's not gonna stop me.
Donkey Kong. Originally released in 1981 in arcades, it was re-released just 1 year later on Game & Watch. Later re-released on the Famicom, NES, Game Boy, 3DS, and more I'm sure I'm missing. Same with Mario Bros. In 1983, except that was re-released the same year on Game & Watch. Later re-released for Famicom, NES, Super Mario Advance games, and more. There's also Super Mario Bros. Originally released on the NES, re-released on the NES in 2 multi-game carts. Virtual consoles on Wii, Wii U, Switch, DSi, and 3DS, in Super Mario All-Stars, Super Mario All-Stars plus Super Mario World, and Super Mario All-Stars 25th Anniversary Edition. Oh, and twice on the Game Boy. The only game that I can come up that was re-released more than Super Mario Bros. Would have to be Breakout, which had a re-release on almost every single console since it came out, and millions of unlicensed clones that aren't named Breakout, but they're Breakout.
Nowadays, remakes are so common. Every console has at least one, or like 40. Nintendo isn't the only company guilty of remaking their old games to look better on their new consoles. Sony and Microsoft have to be held accountable too.
Microsoft and Sony enjoy remaking games too, even games like Shenmue, which isn't even either of theirs. Shenmue 1 and 2 were developed by Sega for the Dreamcast in 1999 and 2001 respectively. After the Dreamcast flopped, there was a 17-year hiatus between Shenmue 2 and 3. During that time, Shenmue 1 and 2 were remade for Xbox One, PlayStation, and PC to help hold over the fans who hadn't completely lost interest in the game in that 17-year gap. How about a game that didn't even need a remake? Like any of the Resident Evil games. Or Dark Souls, Gears of War, Halo, BioShock, Borderlands, Final Fantasy, and Crash Team Racing. Don't get me wrong, there's still some games that I thought were a really good idea to remake. Like Spyro. I remember playing Spyro Year of the Dragon at my neighbor's house, so having a brand new way to experience the first 3 games in stunning HD on a modern console is so much fun for me. Spyro Reignited Trilogy came out 20 years after the original Spyro the Dragon, and it shows how you do a remake right. Toys for Bob, the developer in charge of remaking the game, did an amazing job of keeping the game the exact same, while still bringing a new light to it. One of the biggest drawbacks of the original was the viewing distance. If you were too far away, then stuff would just not be seen. In the Reignited Trilogy, they make it feel more like a huge open world. Another very good example of a remake is the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. I never played the original Crash games. I never had and still don't have a PS1, 2, 4, or 5. So I never got to experience these games. but just from what I've seen online, it looks amazing.
Spyro and Crash really show that if a company actually cares about its games and its fans and really puts a lot of effort into it, it can turn out good. For other companies, it's more, you don't want to buy bread, it's like 30,000 years old. You want this.